Russia just slammed the EU with a lawsuit. Why? Because the brothers were so broke, they announced they were permanently freezing 280 billion euros of Russian assets. What's the other reason? Because this supposedly mighty Europe is reduced to endless meetings and still can't cough up the cash to pump into the Ukraine, folks. The brothers' economies are already a miserable mess. How much money do they think they can keep pinching from taxpayers just to keep feeding this useless beggar, the U-Kraine guy? It's official. They truly drank the Kool-Aid and took a reckless plunge. Of course, Russia's lawsuit is just for show. The brothers know this. If the EU dares to swallow that pill and get away with it, all EU assets currently in Russia will be immediately confiscated. This tit-for-tat move is completely legal because the EU was the thief first. The money EU companies have tied up in Russia. The Belgians say it's around 900 billion. EU, you better watch out. If that funding stream snaps, the Ukraine folks are cut off too. Since 2022, they've been pumped with hundreds of billions of dollars every year, yet territory keeps slipping away steadily. In terms of soldiers, every time Russia rolls up a refrigerated truck to the border, they exchange thousands of Ukraine troops for just a few dozen Russians. Get this, Russia practically has to beg them to accept their own soldiers back. The news outlets still report that the brothers are slamming Russia here and there with painful blows. Russia is supposedly crying their eyes out. Boo-hoo. But none of that changes the reality. The Ukraine troops are completely worn out right now. It's been too long since they've had proper rest. There are no new recruits. The forced dragnet only catches a few stragglers, and morale is in the dumps. The truth is, the brothers are breaking ranks. So, they plan to join NATO to become an anti-Russian outpost. Did they get in yet? His Majesty the Clown King recently announced that Ukraine is ready to abandon its NATO efforts in exchange for shelter from the US and its allies. He claims Ukraine's long-held desire has always been to join NATO, because that is the true protection racket. But alas, he himself admitted that some partners from the US and Europe do not support this path. How utterly heartbreaking. Translating that into street language, they never intended to let the brothers join in the first place. 17 years of eating empty promises? How does that taste? What's so precious about NATO that you would sell out your own comrades? Let's loop back and look at Ukraine's journey with the NATO dream to see why it was a pipe dream, and how, instead of a prosperous and mighty future, it only brought them utter devastating destruction. To understand the problem, we have to go back to the time when the world order was being redrawn by the big players. As you know, after World War II, the world split into two poles. Our communist brother, the Soviet Union, rose up, shining bright and dazzling. The brothers did everything grandly. They built space stations, ships, and cars 10 times bigger than normal. And their farmlands were so vast, they used planes to spray insecticide. The US was terrified and absolutely freaked out, forming an alliance solely to counter the Soviet communist brother. That's how NATO was born, just to push back against the Soviet Union. That was NATO's mission statement, okay? To fight back against the bloc that was fighting them. Seeing this, the Soviet brothers created the Warsaw Pact to counterbalance. Time erased things, and life pushed forward. The mighty Soviet brother was stronger than both the US and Europe, even nearby China. They claimed their title a bit too soon. The US and China joined hands to put the squeeze on the Soviet Union until the very end. Finally, the Soviet Union collapsed. When the father dies, the children are left adrift, each going their separate way. The USSR was gone. The heart of the Soviet Union still beats. That is Russia today. Meanwhile, little Russia, or the Ukraine folks, held on to most of the Soviet nukes. The bad news was that the Ukraine brothers couldn't use them because the brains controlling the weapons were in Moscow. Another issue, these nukes had an expiration date of about 20 years. Maintenance was expensive, but destruction was also expensive. Ukraine was helpless. The US was also worried because the brothers had made many enemies with the Islamic world. What if the corrupt Ukraine leadership stole the nukes and sold them to the bearded guys? That would be worse than the Twin Towers incident. Eventually, in 1994, the brothers reached an agreement. Ukraine would return all of the Soviet nuclear weapons to Russia. In return, Russia guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. However, there was a forbidden condition. They must not align with forces opposing Russia. But the Ukraine brothers took the Western bait. Demanding to join NATO was a clear violation of Russia's taboo. What kind of organization is NATO? Let me remind you, it's a military alliance born during the Cold War to fight back against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed. NATO continued to exist and expand eastward. It accepted former Warsaw Pact members like Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia. Even former Soviet republics like the 3 small Baltic states. If its purpose isn't to prevent Russia from rising again in brilliance, what is it? The brothers might argue that Ukraine is an independent, sovereign country that can join whatever it wants. But alas, we must examine history. History always repeats itself, and reading history helps us avoid the pitfalls of our ancestors. During the Cold War, after the US placed missiles with nukes on Turkish soil, right next door, to threaten the Soviet Union, the mighty Soviets teamed up with their Cuban brothers, right next to the US, to install their own retaliation system. The Americans were paralyzed immediately. It's like living next to scrappers and junk collectors. They pull out something that looks like a B-52 fuel tank every half hour and start sawing. Tell me, wouldn't you be scared? Eventually, the US and the Soviet Union had to compromise to pull all the nuclear weapons out. But the worst part is that the Cuban brothers have been under an embargo ever since. The suffering is endless. Now, imagine if Vietnam allowed the US to dock aircraft carriers and submarines in Nha Trang, or if NATO placed missile launchers in Ha Giang Loop or Ha Long Bay. Would China let us be? Therefore, when you live next to a big, burly neighbor, loaded with hot goods all around, you must be smart, maintain neutrality, and understand the principle of stay solid, play flexible. It's a pity that history only created one Vietnam. If the U-Kraine brothers had known how to play the bamboo diplomacy game, they would now be stinking rich, wearing flowered shorts, sunbathing, and sipping cold beer in a trang under the seductive palm shadows. Instead of lying in a heap like dead sardines on the Belarusian border, instead, they dreamed of being like Poland. They thought joining the Western old foxes automatically made them rich. But alas, eating Western bait doesn't make you rich. Just look at the Poles, they're doing contract work all over the EU, barely making ends meet. They're not getting rich at all. This nature of wanting something for nothing, of wanting to rely on others, pushed Ukraine to seek shelter under NATO's protection umbrella. And indeed, those NATO old foxes pumped quite a bit of money into this crazy dream, aiming to turn Ukraine into a permanent anti-Russian project. US presidents, both Democrat and Republican, contributed to this goal. Bill Clinton initiated NATO expansion in 1999. In 2008, Bush affirmed Ukraine had a path to NATO. In 2014, Obama overthrew the legitimate government in Ukraine. In his first term, Trump supplied lethal hot goods. In December 2021, 3 months before Russia intervened, Biden rejected the security agreements proposed by Putin to maintain a neutral Ukraine. Ukraine had so many opportunities. Mr. Putin patiently held peace talks with the brothers many times, urging them to implement Minsk I and Minsk II. But it turned out the brothers were just stalling to arm Ukraine and prepare for war. Ukraine had ingested the Western bait too deeply. NATO is a military alliance against Russia. If the brothers want to join, it means they intend to stab Russia in the back, coupled with banning the Russian language and culture and shelling Russian-speaking territories. It's obvious. If the brothers had gotten a seat at the table with those old foxes, they would have become incredibly brazen. Clearly, Russia had to strike first and hard, hitting the brothers so hard their own parents wouldn't recognize them. And so, the confrontation between Russia and the US West and Ukraine through this proxy war is the biggest historical confrontation of the 21st century so far. If the US fails, it can just dust its hands off and walk away. At most, they'll lose some money they can just print themselves. But if Russia loses, Russia will definitely be split into tiny countries and regions. The Russian people risk losing their homeland and becoming eternal wanderers. That explains why the Russian brothers have to fight for their very survival. The irony is that the war could have ended in April 2022, when Russia was willing to negotiate easier terms. 28 or 19 draft peace plan points that would have allowed Ukraine to largely keep its territory. But at that crucial moment, the Western wind blew too strong. The war hawks incited and encouraged Zelensky to act as the pawn and continue fighting Russia to the end. So, instead of signing a peace deal, the Clown King was forced back into the war to play his role. Now comes the US under Trump, the one cleaning up the mess, realizing this war costs infinite money and victory is a luxury too far. So, the mouth Trump is starting to plan a quiet exit, even thinking about cooperating with Russia to contain some other Eastern power. But the rumored secret US-Russia contact makes people look at Zelensky and feel pity for the fate of a puppet who has outlived his usefulness. This reminds us of leaders who became dependent in other wars throughout history, like former President Theo of the Republic of Vietnam back then, while Turned Von Yoon was impatiently begging for weapons. Theo desperately wrote to President Ford, pleading for a loan for freedom. You must remember those emotional words. I request that you ask Congress to agree to a final, long-term loan of $3 billion United States dollars, to be distributed over 3 years and a 10-year repayment period at an interest rate decided by Congress. Theo, in his desperation, has offered the country's entire resources as collateral as the liberation forces of the Vietnamese people advanced on Saigon. Once again, history repeats itself. Zelensky wanders everywhere, begging for money from Paris, London, Brussels to Rome. Alas, the wretches still praise him for his courage and righteousness. But they still won't cough up a single dime for this outpost, protecting European security against the Russian threat. The Saturday Night Live skit teaches us that you have to know who you are in this life. When living next to a superpower, don't form a military alliance with a third country to plot against it. The best thing the brothers can do is team up to get rich. The Clown King has now had to back down, abandoning the NATO dream for US and European security guarantees. 17 years of empty promises wasn't enough, so they plan to eat another one, huh? It's too late for Ukraine to abandon NATO now. At this stage, Russia will not stop. The brothers are hitting hard. How can they stop? Uncle Putin has said he will keep fighting until the brothers lose all access to the sea, ensuring that Ukraine can never threaten Russian security again. Ultimately, when great powers adjust their strategies, small countries must use clever diplomacy to survive and thrive. In any war, the people are always the biggest losers. Therefore, a fast and genuine peace is not just the right. Choice Sid is what Kyiv needs most to breathe a sigh of relief after 3 years of storm.